Samuel Vance lived in a world of bulletproof glass and cold billions. But in a single heartbeat, his entire empire turned to ash. He had just handed $100 bill to a nameless street urchin, a gesture of arrogant charity meant to clear his path. But as the girl's small, frostbitten hand touched the paper, the fabric of her tattered coat slipped. There, etched into her pale skin, was a birthmark he knew better than his own name. A red flower, the exact mark of the daughter he had abandoned 10 years ago. Samuel didn't just open the door. He threw himself into the New York slush, ignoring the screams of car horns and the terrified look in the girl's eyes. As he knelt on the frozen pavement, the truth hit him like a physical blow. He had spent a decade building skyscrapers, while his own flesh and blood was singing for pennies in their shadows. He would soon learn the most devastating truth of all. His ex-wife had died in a charity ward 4 years ago, and for 1,400 days, his daughter had been a ghost of the New York streets. The king of Wall Street was finally on his knees, not for a deal, but for a daughter who didn't even remember his face. ***, welcome back to Scarred but Pure. Today, we witness the high price of pride and the long, bitter road to redemption. A father who thought he had everything is about to find out he has nothing without the child he left in the dark. If you believe that a father's love should be stronger than his ego, hit that subscribe button right now. Write "reunited" in the comments if you want to see Samuel avenge his daughter's lost years. This is the story of the man who owned New York, but lost his soul. The New York wind roared, but for Samuel Vance, the world had gone deathly silent. He reached out to touch the girl's shoulder, but she flinched, pulling her cracked wooden guitar to her chest like a shield. Her eyes weren't filled with the joy of a reunion. They were filled with the sharp, jagged survival instinct of a creature that had been hunted for too long. "Lily." Samuel's voice was a shattered ruin. It's me. It's your father." The girl stared at him, her face smudged with city soot, her lips blue from the cold. There was no recognition. To her, this was just another rich man in a $3,000 suit, the kind of man who usually looked through her as if she were made of glass. "I don't have a father," she whispered, her voice a fragile rasp. "My father is a ghost. My mom said he was too busy being a king to care about a peasant like me. Please, sir, just take your money back and let me go. I have to find a subway vent to sleep on before the snow gets deeper." Every word was a poisoned needle in Samuel's heart. 10 years ago, fueled by a toxic divorce and his own obsession with power, he had walked out. He had convinced himself that his wife was dragging him down, that he needed to be free to build his legacy. He had sent checks for a few years, but when his own secretary told him they had moved to London and were living in luxury with another man, he stopped asking questions. He had let himself believe the lie because it was easier than facing the guilt. But the reality was a nightmare. After Samuel left, his wife's health collapsed. She worked as a laundress in the basements of the very building Samuel owned, breathing in chemical fumes until her lungs gave out 4 years ago. Lily had been 6 years old when she watched her mother be buried in a nameless grave. Since then, she had survived by her wits, avoiding foster care predators and learning that the only thing New York gave for free was a cold shoulder. Samuel stood up, his expensive wool coat soaking up the filth of the gutter, and lifted his daughter. She weighed nothing, just a handful of bones and a broken spirit. He carried her into the Rolls-Royce, vowing that the city would burn for what it had done to his child. The Vance penthouse was a palace of marble and silk, but to Lily, it was a terrifying planet. She sat on the edge of a white sofa, her dirty rags leaving black stains on the fabric. She wouldn't eat the food the private chefs prepared, and she wouldn't go near the warm bath the maids had drawn. She sat in the corner of the room, clutching her broken guitar, her eyes darting toward the door as if she were waiting for the moment the dream would end and she would be kicked back into the snow. Samuel watched her from the doorway, his heart breaking 1,000 times a minute. He saw her hide a piece of bread under her pillow, a reflex from the streets where the next meal was never promised. He realized that while he could buy her the world, he couldn't buy back the 4 years she had spent cold and alone. As the days passed, a darker truth began to emerge. Samuel's private investigators uncovered a trail of betrayal that led directly into his own inner circle. It wasn't just a mistake that he hadn't found them. It was a conspiracy. His own cousin, Julian Vance, had been the one intercepting the letters. Julian had been the one who bribed the social workers to keep Lily on the streets so that Samuel would remain childless, making Julian the sole heir to the Vance billions. Julian had watched Lily beg on the streets for years, passing her in his own limousine, laughing as the rightful heir of the empire scrounged for scraps. Samuel's grief transformed into a cold, lethal fury. He didn't just want Julian fired. He wanted him erased. But first, he had to heal the girl who still called herself a ghost. He spent his nights on the floor next to her bed, humming the old lullaby until she finally fell asleep without clutching her guitar for dear life. The day of the Vance Global Board meeting was the coldest day of the year. Julian Vance sat at the head of the table, arrogant and smug, prepared to sign the papers that would give him control of the company. He thought he had won. He thought the secret was buried in the slush of Fifth Avenue. The doors swung open. Samuel Vance walked in, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Lily. She was dressed in a simple, elegant wool coat, her face clean, her hair brushed golden. But in her hand, she still carried that broken wooden guitar. The room went silent as the grave. Julian's face turned from a smirk to the color of ash. "I believe you're in my seat, Julian," Samuel said, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "Samuel, what is this? Who is this child?" Julian stammered, his eyes darting toward the security guards. "This is the heir to Vance Global," Samuel replied, stepping forward until he was inches from Julian's face. "And this guitar, this is the evidence of your soul's rot. I have the bank records, Julian. I have the statements from the social workers you bribed. You watched my daughter starve so you could sit in this chair." Samuel didn't call the police immediately. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He revealed the evidence to the entire board, and then he exercised his founder's right to liquidate Julian's entire stake in the company. In 1 hour, Julian went from a billionaire to a man with nothing but the clothes on his back. "You told my daughter she was a pest when she knocked on your window last month," Samuel whispered as the police finally arrived to lead Julian away in handcuffs. "Now you can see how the streets feel for yourself. Don't worry. I won't give you a $100 bill." The story ends not in the boardroom, but in a small park in the Hudson Valley. Samuel and Lily stood over a new white marble headstone for Lily's mother. It wasn't a charity grave anymore. Samuel knelt beside his daughter, finally playing a song on a brand new guitar. Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in 10 years, the king of Manhattan wasn't looking at the skyline. He was looking at his daughter's smile, realizing that he had finally closed the only deal that ever mattered. He had brought his soul home.